Thank you, Lum, we will win when there are 50 state versions of the Pennsylvania Leadership Conference, and we're going to get there. Reagan gave the talk about a time for choosing when the choice was the United States or turning into part of the Soviet Empire. Because of Reagan's success and the work of people in this room and across the country, we destroyed the Soviet Union, and now we're faced with Obama, who offers us a slightly less stark choice. We now need to decide whether we're going to be the United States, or East Germany, but somewhere between Greece, France, and Chicago. And while it's a little less scary than the choice of joining the Soviet Empire, I think we'd rather be America. And we're going to say no to Obama and his plan to turn us into a European welfare state, which is what he intends to do shortly after the November election, if he gets elected. Now, there are two teams in American politics. Historically, the Republicans and Democrats were the two parties, but for many years, if somebody told you they were Republican, all you really knew about them was that they were born north of the Mason-Dixon line. You didn't know their position on taxes or spending. But during the lifetime of Ronald Reagan, we divided the two parties out to where if you want limited government, you're a Republican. If you want unlimited government, you're a Democrat. And we moved away from the time where little old ladies in Mississippi who agreed with Ronald Reagan on everything were voting with George McGovern because Sherman had been mean to Atlanta recently. And I think this is a much more rational way for us to sort of pick up teams. Look, the people in this room, our team, the center-right, are people who are in politics because on the central issue, the vote-moving issue for each one of us, we want one thing from the government. We wish to be left alone. If the modern Reagan Republican conservative movement was to sit around a table, you could go around the table. Who's there? Taxpayers, don't raise my taxes. Property owners, leave my property rights alone. Homeschoolers, let me educate my own children. The Second Amendment community, I serve on the board of directors of the National Rifle Association. They simply wish to be left alone to practice their Second Amendment rights. They do not insist that every fourth grade child in public school be taught books entitled Heather Has Two Hunters. Small business men and women, professionals, the self-employed, simply wish to be left alone. They're not asking for government grants or contracts or giveaways. And the various communities of faith, people for whom the most important thing is practicing their faith and transmitting it to their children. So we have an ecumenical right, evangelical Protestants, conservative Catholics, Orthodox Jews, Muslims, Mormons, do not agree on who gets to heaven or how. But they do agree that if they need to be left free to go straight to heaven, so the guy across the table who completely misunderstands Scripture can go to Hades on his own. But around our table, not everybody agrees on everything. The guy who wants to make money all day looks across the table at the guy who wants to go to church all day, says, that's not how I spend my time. And they both look over at the guy who wants to fondle his guns all day and says, that's not how we spend our time. What's important is that at the end of the day, we all vote for the same candidate because we all wish to be left alone and to live in freedom. It's not necessary that we all spend every weekend together or agree on 20 points or whatever, but our coalition has been a low-maintenance coalition because it holds together. And the other team, I got a call once from New York Press when Hillary Clinton was up in New York campaigning, and she said, you know, what the left needs is one of those meetings like Grover has where we get all the progressive forces together. And the reporter said, what do you think of that? And I explained how our coalition works together because we're not in conflict with each other on any vote-moving issues. We may not care about some of the other issues people vote about, but they want liberty in certain areas. I want liberty in these areas. Okay, we're all voting for the same candidate, moving in the same direction. Said Hillary's table, recently stolen by Obama, is different. Go around the table on the left. Trial lawyers, labor union bosses, big city political machines, the two wings of the dependency movement. people who are locked into welfare dependency, and people who make $90,000 a year, managing the dependency of others, making sure none of them get jobs and become Republicans. Then we have all the coercive utopians, right? The guys who get government grants to push the rest of us around, the people who design the toilets too small to flush completely, those cars that you can't fit your entire family into, the light bulbs that convince you you have glaucoma. And on the Sabbath, you have to separate the green glass from the white glass from the brown glass for the recycling priests. And they have a list of things that you have to do and that you're not allowed to do, which is slightly longer and more tedious than Leviticus. So around the left's table, they can work together against our freedom only so long as we are stupid enough to keep throwing tax dollars in the center of the table. If we do that for them, then our friends around the left can, one for you, like the scene after the bank robbery in the movie, you're right? One for you, and they're all very happy. But if we do our job, if we put our foot on the air hose, if we say no new taxes and hold that thought, then as the pile of cash in the center of the left's table goes down, all the folks on the left begin to look at each other a little bit more like the second to the last scene in those lifeboat movies. Now they're wondering who they're going to eat or who they're going to throw overboard. Because the left is not made up of friends and allies. The left is made up of competing parasites. Step one, don't raise taxes. And that's why the Taxpayer Protection Pledge that Americans for Tax Reform shares with elected officials at all levels is very clear. No net tax increase. Don't raise taxes. Tax reform, sure. Reduce rates, broaden the base like Reagan did. Good stuff. Make it more transparent. If you want to shift to one tax instead of another, fine. No net tax increase. Tax reform cannot be a Trojan horse for tax increases. And if we hold the line there, then the other team doesn't get to spend more money electing more Democratic precinct workers. So what we have to work on is not raising taxes, and that's what the pledge does. And the pledge, because we now have about all but 6 members of the U.S. House, Republicans in the House have signed the pledge, 41 senators, 1,300 state legislators, quite a number of governors, including the one in Pennsylvania, have taken the pledge and kept it. And because we've put that together, we've basically branded the modern Reagan Republican Party as the party that will not raise your taxes. So the candidates running for the House and Senate this year, 99% of them will have taken the Taxpayer Protection Pledge, so you can go into the voting booth dead drunk and vote for the Republican and be pretty sure that they're not going to raise your taxes. Makes it easier to vote for the Republican Party, and this is what Coca-Cola does, right? Coca-Cola puts a lot of time and effort into quality control and branding. So you can go into the store, pick up a Coke, throw it in the basket, go home. You don't have to look at it, read the ingredients, ask your friends what's in. You know what's inside. You take it home. But if you get home and you're 2/3 of the way through the Coke bottle, and you look down and notice that there is a rat head in what's left in your Coke bottle, you don't say to yourself, I'm thinking I might not finish all the rest of this particular Coke this evening. You begin to wonder whether you'll buy Coke in the future, and you go on local TV and show them the cool rat head, and Coke has a big problem because it damages the brand for everybody else. Republican elected officials who vote for tax increases are rat heads in a Coke bottle. Step one, don't raise taxes. Now, there is a necessary step two. Stop spending so much money. And not all our candidates have done quite so well on step two, as many of them have done on step one. And I think we can credit the Tea Party movement with bringing spending up to the level that people understand taxes is non-negotiable, and now we understand that we have to rein in spending. We can't let that one slide, which for too long, I didn't raise taxes, and then spending creeped up, okay? So we need to keep spending down. And the Tea Party movement, which was a tremendous asset to the center-right, which has greatly strengthened the conservative movement, the Republican Party, is, I calculate, the sixth wave of immigration into the modern Republican Party. The first wave was the Goldwater election, 63, 64. All these people came into the party. And then you had the religious right in the late 70s coming in, concerned about religious liberty issues. And again, every time these new groups would come into the party, there'd be two reactions. The New York Times would explain, oh, you guys are finished now. You've got all these millions of new people. They're going to destroy you. Okay? And I understand why the left would advise us not to have new allies and friends. But there would be Republicans at the town committee meeting. And they'd go, oh, all these new people coming in. There used to be 10 of us, and now there's 70, and I'm not sure they're going to reelect me. This is a problem. I don't think that Walmart, when they see lots of new cars in the parking lot and customers coming in, go, uh-oh, look at all those new cars. They're parking in our parking lot. They're buying all our stuff. We're going to have to get new stuff. This is a disaster. More customers, more activists, more political oomph and activism builds a party, builds a movement. Then we saw the Pat Robertson campaign, the 2 million people who worked on his campaign in '88 came into the Republican Party after the '88 race. Then there was the Ron Paul movement and the young people that he's activated, and the Tea Party. Every one of these strengthens the modern center-right and conservative movement, and the Tea Party movement in particular put focus on spending. Now, we did see our friend President Obama, the first thing he wanted to do was do the stimulus program, right? Which was to take $800 billion and throw it in the center of the left's table so all the Democratic precinct workers could take their share. And remember, they had a theory as to why this is called Keynesian economics, and the theory was that if we take $1 from someone who earned it, either by force in taxes or borrowing it, and give it to somebody from Chicago, there'll be more dollars in the room. That was the theory, okay? We're going to have Obama, Reid, and Pelosi each take a bucket to one side of the lake and dip the bucket into the lake. Then they're going to walk around to the other side of the lake, and in front of the MSNBC cameras, they're going to pour the 3 buckets back into the lake and explain that they are stimulating the lake to great depths. You laugh, but you have to understand we're going to do this 800 billion times. And then the lake will be much deeper than it ever was before. That was their theory, and it didn't work. John Lott and I just finished a book, which is out last week, called Debacle, about how Obama made things worse, okay? Bookstores everywhere. But one of my favorite parts of it is some regression analysis, and you say, how did they spend all this stimulus money? It's a good question. How much did each state get? Well, states that had higher unemployment got less. States that had more foreclosures got less. States that had more bankruptcies got less. What does it correlate with? Who got money? The percentage of your congressional delegation that were Democrats. Okay? Didn't even correlate with the Obama's vote, because he wasn't allowed in the room when the Democrats in the House and Senate wrote the stimulus package. Okay? They wrote it to send money to their friends back home. That was the stimulus package. Completely political, had nothing to do with economics, and it certainly had nothing to do with recovery, because we didn't get a recovery as a result. Now, we have this choice: Europe, United States. And I think we're going to make this decision as a country in the next decade. A lot of people come and say, this election will determine. This election is very important. But in the next 10 years, we're going to decide to make either a U-turn on the road to serfdom and get back to being the United States, or we're going to put our foot on the accelerator and turn into something between Greece, France, and Sweden. Okay? Those are the choices. And it happens in the next decade, because we have 3 presidential races, 12, 16, and 20. We got House and Senate. Now, here's why I'm optimistic. The U.S. House, Republican majority, 25 seats with redistricting. The experts are telling us the Republicans should gain 1 nationally. We'd have done better if the other team wasn't running the Justice Department and interfering with states' ability to redistrict themselves. But net one, if things move forward, I think the Republicans can do better. But for the next decade, thanks to redistricting and the fact that there are more of us than them, the Republicans should hold the House for a decade. Now in the Senate, Republicans need 4 new Republican senators to get a simple majority. In 2012, this November, there's one election here. There are 23 Democrat seats up in the Senate and 10 Republicans. Of the 10 Republicans, there are really only 2 that you worry about, Massachusetts, and Scott Brown is polling ahead because he looks great in the bathing suit. And I think we're going to win in Maine, which is a toss-up because the incumbent's not running. But you worry about Massachusetts because I'm from Massachusetts, okay? Before I emigrated to the United States, I used to live there. So you want to keep an eye on Massachusetts. Of the 23 states, at least half can and should be won by Republicans this November. Not in a wave election, but in an okay election, okay? And then 2 years from now, so that we just need to net 4 of those 23. And I would say half of them are doable. We should win 5 easily. A lot of work. 2 years later, 2014, there are 20 Democrats up in the Senate and only 13 Republicans. The 13 Republicans are all quite safe in red states and solid incumbents. Of the 20 Democrats up in 2014, again, half are in red states and are available to be defeated. So there are 43 Democrats up in the next 2 election cycles, half of which are very vulnerable. We can get to 60 votes in the Senate, which, as Obama taught us, is what you need to do to make dramatic change in the United States of America. Now, the reason we have so many targets of opportunity in 12 and 14 in the Senate is that Karl Rove and Bush cleverly gave all those seats away in 06 and 08. You may not have seen this coming, but some of us saw the sheer genius involved. And they come around, and we take them all back in 12 and 14. So there was a plan if you were worried. But it did give us the opportunity, lots of targets of opportunity in 12 and 14. So we'll have the House for the decade. We should have a Republican majority for this decade and hopefully get to 60. Now the question is the presidency. And it's difficult to beat an incumbent, but here we have a president who was a very good candidate in 2008 and not a very good president. So about 2 years into his presidency, he decided to go back to being a candidate, which he was good at. And he spent 2 years, running again. And so when we deal with him every day, you're not talking to the President of the United States, you're talking to a candidate. Everything he says and does, every piece of legislation is a campaign document. It's not a governing document. It's not, he was president for maybe 2 years, and then he gave up on that because it was difficult, went back to being a candidate. And he's a good candidate, okay? Not a good president, but a good candidate, and that's dangerous. There's been some confusion on the Republican conservative side on this whole presidential stuff. And I think there are a couple reasons. One, in the old days, we always knew where we were, right? There was Goldwater, Rockefeller, Nixon, Rockefeller, Reagan, Bush, Taft, Eisenhower. Pick a team, go to your corners, we're all set. This year, everybody who ran was a Reagan Republican, right? I mean, they were all fine. You go into a room and you're filled with beautiful women. Which one do you talk to? They're all beautiful, right? All the candidates were Reagan Republicans. So we had this sort of serial monogamy thing going on with the Republican primaries. Everybody fell in love with Rick Perry, and everybody fell in love with Herman Cain, and then Gingrich and Santorum, and back and forth. And the reason that was possible was they're all largely Reagan Republicans. Those of us who are old enough to remember, that was the party used to be more divided when they ran presidential candidates, and they're all largely moving in the same direction. The other factor that's a little disconcerting is while we have some fine candidates running, we all take a look over every once in a while at what the junior varsity is doing. Did you see what Chris Christie did? Did you see Scott Walker? I mean, the depth of our bench. We're looking over guys who, can't run this time around, but it's amazing the number of governors and Marco Rubios and senators that could be presidential, vice presidential candidates. And it's just amazing. And you go, well, why not one of them? Well, they're coming. It's nice to have a good bench. And then the third thing that's a little bit disconcerting is we're interviewing for a different job. Traditionally, Republicans have been presidentially focused. We always knew we had to have the president. Why? Because we knew over 60 years that we were the minority in the House and the Senate, and our only chance not to be eaten by the Soviet Union or to be socialized was to have a Republican president, and the minority in the House, the minority in the Senate would grab hold of those coattails and hang on for dear life. And whatever way they zigged and zagged, we held on, because only together, a president and a minority in the House and Senate could just stop the other team from doing too much damage. So we were focused on the presidency. The Democrats, over 60 years, had learned we're the natural governing majority in the House and the Senate. Every once in a while we get a president, but we run things from here. Remember when Obama came in? Okay? They said, oh, here's the stimulus package we wrote. Oh, and here's the budget we wrote. And here's the banking bill, Dodd-Frank. It's not called the Geithner bill. It's the Dodd-Frank bill, the two guys who gave us the crisis. It's only fair. So their bill, and then they turn around and Obama. Oh, I'm sorry. And here's the Obamacare bill, which we wrote in the House and the Senate. Sign it, okay? So Obama was allowed to do two things. He tripled the number of troops in Afghanistan, and he got us involved in Libya. Those were like the two decisions that he made independent of the Democratic leadership in Congress. Everything else, they hand it to him, he signs it. That's what he's done. Well, we now have a Republican House and Senate that have learned to be a majority. And we had a Republican Senate. We'll get it back again. And whoever is president will come in, and the Republicans in the House and Senate will say, here's the Paul Ryan bill. Here's our roadmap for the next decade. Here are all the 24 jobs bills that we've passed in the House. Please sign those. And if you have any ideas, leave them with the secretary on the way out, and we'd love to look at them. We're not auditioning for fearless leader. We're not auditioning for some leader to tell us what direction to go. We know where we're going. Less spending, less taxes. Paul Ryan's budget plan does most of the stuff right there. It's pretty much set. We just need a guy or a lady who's got enough digits to sign the bills, okay? We're not asking for someone to give us direction. We're asking someone to work as part of a team. It's a different job than we've been auditioning for in the past. Now, in addition to making these decisions at the national level, I would point out that the country's doing this big parting of the seas at the state level. There are 24 states with a Republican House and Senate and governor, 5 states with a Republican House and Senate, no governor, only 29 states where the Republicans have both houses, 5 of them they don't have the governorship. 11 states where the Democrats have the governorship in both houses. They're busy turning themselves into France and Sweden all by themselves, okay? Our 24, if you look around the states, are doing tort reform, moving on school choice, changing labor law, defunding organized labor in the public sector, or rather saying you got to go steal your own money. The state won't take union dues away from workers. If you want their money. In Wisconsin, if you're the teachers union in Wisconsin and you want $1,000 from that teacher, which is the average dues over there, go get your own blackjack and do it yourself. The state is not doing this for you, okay? And oddly enough, they haven't had much success in getting that money away from the teachers union. So the states, 10 years from now, we're going to have Republican states with more school choice and tort reform and lower taxes and more growth and more opportunity and a series of, unfortunately, mini Greases and Frances in California, Illinois, and West Virginia. And there'll be a separating, and we'll be able to see things that work and things that don't. No one's life is a complete failure. California can serve as a bad example. So there's some real opportunities there, and I would point out that while we're doing this at the state level, we can change the demographics of the country. The Democrats talk about demographics as if it was all ethnicity and race and so on. Take a look at the demographics on voting. Because of the 41 states with concealed carry laws, we now have 7 million people, Americans, with concealed carry permits. Those are people who are never giving up their Second Amendment rights, okay? We've changed the demographics of the country by making it easier for people to own guns for self-defense. The homeschooling movement, illegal in most states, maybe all states, 20 years ago, now 2 million and growing. Those people are never giving up their freedom to educate their own children. This changes the demographics of the country. As you have fewer state and local workers, which has been going on over the last 3 years, and people move into the private sector, government workers, on average, are 10% more Democrat. If they make more than $75,000 a year, they're 30% more Democrat. If they have the job for 20 years, they're 30% more Democrat. So there's a reason why the Democrat solution to every problem in the world is 100,000 more fill-in-the-blank government workers, because that creates more Democratic precinct workers. Similarly, people with $5,000, these are Scott Rasmussen polling numbers, people with $5,000 worth of stock in a 401k or an IRA are 18% more Republican and less Democrat. All demographic groups, all ages, high income, low income, men, women, government workers, private sector. Share ownership makes you more Republican. Okay, you can figure out why this is. You're more independent, you're more in control. And that's why the Republican solution to everything is personal savings accounts, healthcare savings accounts, education savings accounts, homeowner savings accounts. We want more people to be part of the ownership society because it creates more Republicans. So as we do this, the Democrats talk about demographics if it was all race or ethnicity. You can change the demographics by giving people more freedom, and then they're willing to defend it politically, and they will not have it taken away. I want to end by putting a cautionary note out. The other team is going to play to envy. They're going to play their game of trickle-down taxation, where they promise only to tax the rich. Now, I think this won't work in the same way that, remember the Trojan horse thing that worked so well against Troy? There's a reason why the Greeks didn't conquer the rest of Asia Minor with the same trick, okay? Because after a while, people go, wait a minute. Well, Obama promised us for 2008, I'm only going to tax people who make more than $250,000 a year, not the rest of you, okay? 16 days into his presidency, he signed his first tax increase. The tax increase was on people who use tobacco. Average income of people who smoke cigarettes, $40,000 a year. There's only one person in the country who earns more than $250,000 a year and smokes cigarettes. His name is Barack Obama. We've been through this before. The alternative minimum tax was going to hit 115 people. Next January, it hits 31 million. The Spanish-American War tax, which many of you may remember, was put in 1898, okay, on rich people who owned phones, because only rich people owned phones. Anyway, Spanish-American War tax lasted 100 years. For most of that 100 years, it was paid by everybody in the country. And while I went to public school, I was watching the History Channel on TV and discovered that this war has been over for some time. The income tax was only supposed to hit 2% of the population, now hits more than half. We've been through this before. I think the play to envy will not work, and I give you a couple of reasons. One, again, Massachusetts. We have in Massachusetts a flat rate income tax by Constitution, 5.3% I think now. But it has to be flat. It cannot be more on some people than others. 5 times the spending interests if put on the ballot in Massachusetts. Let's go to a graduated, progressive income tax. 5 times Massachusetts, Deep Blue, Ted Kennedy, George McGovern, Massachusetts, has voted it down because they said in very public conversation, yeah, year 1 you raised Ted Kennedy's taxes and cut mine, but over time, if you separate us, you divide us into different groups, you'll mug us one at a time. This is the Richard Speck theory of tax increases, that if you can't take on everyone in the room at once, you take them out of the room one at a time. And we're not falling for this. Washington State, blue Washington State, 7 times, they don't have an income tax in Washington State, 7 times the spenders have said, let's have an income tax, and last year, 2010, they said, only on people who make like $500,000 a year, and it was voted down 60-40. So this idea that the American people are driven by envy and hatred of others is just, I mean, that might work in some other countries. It's not working in the United States, and I think that if we remind people that people who say they're only going to tax the rich haven't finished the sentence. I'm only going to tax the rich first, then you, okay? and the play to envy will also not work. So with that said, this decade, we can turn the country around permanently. Ryan doesn't just stop or slow the march towards big government. He turns it around. By doing reform of welfare programs, by doing reform of entitlements, he reforms them to be smaller and less expensive and to create real savings and more investors and more share owners in the United States of America and people willing to defend their own liberty. With that said, this election's year and for the next 10 years, I think we are decisively going to decide that we're going to be America and not France and not Greece and not Chicago. Thank you.